I always wanted to be a storyteller. The thing that I'm most interested right now, creative writing in both Japanese and in English. When it comes to Japanese pronunciation, pitch accent, I think, is probably the thing that was most difficult for me. I've spent so long being extremely conscious of words, and that's a curse, but it's a blessing because when it comes to written work, every single word matters.
Hey there, and thank you for tuning in. We're excited to bring you another great conversation today. If you like the show and want to support us, please hit the subscribe button so we can keep bringing you great content week after week. And if you're feeling extra generous, give this video a like and share your thoughts and comments down below. Thank you so much. And now, let's get into it. Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and today we welcome Dogen.
Hey everyone, Dogen here.
Thank you so much for coming all the way from Kyushu on a rainy Tuesday here in Osaka.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I think a lot of our listeners and viewers may be familiar with you. Some of them have requested that we interview you. Your good friend, Mr. Yabatan, has also highly recommended you. And most people know you for your comedy and your pitch accent and the courses you're giving up for Japanese language online. And we're going to get to all of this, but I'm curious about what brought you to Japan in the first place?
Sure. Like many people, I kind of became a weeb, otaku, in my teens. Although I was into anime, I guess the first thing that got me into Asian culture at large was martial arts. I had played basically all the big American, not necessarily American, but ball sports growing up. So baseball, soccer, basketball. And there was something about martial arts that was so fundamentally different that I thought was so interesting. And I had always wanted to do it, but all of the ball sports that I did, it was all like clubs that were sponsored by volunteers in the community. So none of these clubs cost any money. Mm-hmm. Whereas like the martial arts clubs were pretty prohibitively expensive. And because of that, I was never able to actually attend any martial arts school or anything like that. But after I saw Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, when I was, 13-ish, something like that, I just thought it was the coolest thing in the world. And I got really into what's called martial arts tricking. And
what's that?
Well, it's kind of like the acrobatic elements of martial arts combined with the acrobatic elements of things like gymnastics and breakdancing, etc. So it's just kind of like freestyle acrobatics. Mm-hmm. And there was kind of two schools within that. There was the martial arts tricksters, so people that had actually professional martial art, not necessarily professional, but they had actually gone to martial arts schools and they had the formal training. And then there was the other group, the backyard tricksters. And that's what I became. People that were all just self-taught. And I just like borrowed my dad's camera, and there was like a website at the time called trickstutorials.com where everyone in the world that was into that kind of thing, because this is before YouTube, it was just like an online forum where everyone would share the information like, oh yeah, your technique is a little bit wrong about that. We'd kind of just like go back and forth. But I started doing that. And as I got more and more into that, again, initially it was kind of more Chinese martial arts, like Shaolin monks, the Shaolin temple, Kung Fu, that kind of thing. But then I got kind of into Japanese martial arts as well. And then I have a cousin who was very into Asian culture in general. And he listened to a lot of K-pop and J-pop. And his favorite artist was Ayumi Hamasaki, who is kind of like the queen of J-pop, arguably, I guess. And whenever I would go to his house, we would like listen to her music, or maybe Utada Hikaru, or I don't know, just a whole bunch of different J-pop artists. And kind of the same thing happened to me that happened when I learned about, or when I watched Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. It just kind of like hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, this is so different, but like so interesting. And I want to like learn more about it. And I started listening to a bunch of J-pop, and I started getting into like Japanese movies and stuff. at the time, again, no YouTube or anything like that. So I would just go to Blockbuster Video and rent anything I could get my hands on that was Japanese. So kind of like the cult classics like Audition, Ichi the Killer, all the Ghibli films, Ninja Scroll, et cetera, et cetera. And I think probably by the time I was, when I was about 14 or 15, I started self-studying Japanese. But then I got more into the martial arts tricking, so much so that it became kind of like my whole life for almost 10 years. And I kind of put my Japanese studies on hold, although I continued to listen to almost exclusively Japanese music and watch a lot of Japanese films and anime and that kind of thing. Dragon Ball Z, Hajime no Ippo. This is kind of getting more into like my first couple years of college, Monster, et cetera, et cetera. But during my first year of college, I didn't know what I wanted to major in. I took a bunch of different classes. My friend recommended business. I tried it, hated it, and I thought maybe I should take a Japanese class. I was pretty into that when I was, again, younger. And when I tried it, I absolutely loved it. Applied for study abroad, and I think it was during study abroad, probably before then, but I think I confirmed to myself during study abroad that I wanted to live in Japan indefinitely. I think before that, I wanted to, but once I was there and I had experienced it, I was like, yep, this is for me. And after I graduated from college, I came back on the JET program, and I've more or less been here ever since.
So that study abroad is actually the first time you got to go to Japan after these years of build-up of taking in all this Japanese cultures from martial arts to music to anime and manga. What was it like when you actually arrived here the first time and you were like, oh, wait, I'm not just listening to my Walkman. I'm hearing people all around me speak Japanese.
Oh, I was on cloud nine. The first time I actually came was not study abroad. I took like a 2-week trip. Maybe it wasn't quite that long. Maybe it was about 10 days in between my first and second years of college. And that experience, I think this is probably true for everyone that's into Japan. The first time you come to Japan, and again, if you're only here for a limited amount of time, it's just like, oh my gosh, the entire time that you're here, just like stimulus overload, as you mentioned, kind of like it's everything that I've seen in movies. It's not, just in my Walkman anymore. It's like everything is actually happening around me. And so I think I was just like on a high the entire trip. But I think during study abroad, that's when I kind of started to actually process what Japan is, like how, of course, all of the positive things about Japan that I learned about before coming, I got to experience those. But then at the same time, I started noticing things about Japan that I hadn't ever learned about in any classroom or anything like that. And some of the downsides, so to speak. And despite those, I still knew that I wanted to stay here. But yeah, I think it was probably maybe halfway through study abroad where I was like, yep, this is for me.
What was this thing that halfway through kind of changed your mindset? I'm staying here for not forever. Well, who knows, maybe forever, but indefinitely.
Well, I think that was around the time as well that I started being able to articulate myself in Japanese. And that was a very big deal for me because up until that point, I got to experience Japan, but it was kind of through, what would you say? There was a layer of separation because I wasn't good enough at Japanese to do things the Japanese way or to do things kind of like firsthand. I would either have to get help or, say something in English and get someone to translate or something like that. But once I was able to start articulating myself, one of the interesting things I think probably about language in general, but maybe particularly about Japanese, is that it's so intrinsically linked with Japanese culture that once you get to a certain level of Japanese, your ability to appreciate Japanese culture and experience the nuances in Japanese culture dramatically increases as well. And so I think I was able to start properly experiencing Japan, perhaps. And once I was able to do that, that was maybe the tipping point.
It does really change something. My first experience as well, when I lived as an exchange student without speaking any Japanese, I left disappointed because I was always in this bubble, unable to interact with anyone. Basically like a prolonged tourist in a way, right? Where
Exactly.
you just observe and take it in. Eventually, you had that tipping point. You kind of got over this Japanese language, and then you said you graduated from college and you went on the JET program and you came back and never left again. Where did you end up with the JET program?
Oita Prefecture. So I studied abroad at Keio University in Tokyo, which is kind of central Tokyo. And I had a fantastic time. And I think that everyone that's interested in Japan needs to live in a big city, ideally Tokyo at least once, and I think at least for a year. Osaka's a great option as well. I lived in Osaka for about 6 months as well, but after living in Tokyo for a year, I also realized that while that year was great, it wasn't where I wanted to stay. I'm not that big. I'm not really a city person, I guess. It was a little bit overwhelming for me. And when I went back to the States to finish my degree, to do my 4th year of university, I met someone who started going to the University of Washington directly from Japan, and he was from Oita Prefecture. And he said, well, you've already experienced Tokyo. Why don't you try a different place? Why don't you try and go to my hometown, Beppu, which is in Oita Prefecture? And I was like, why not? So I wrote down Beppu, but they ended up placing me in like the middle of nowhere in a different part of Oita Prefecture. And there are many places in Japan, many towns that are like between 50,000 and 200,000 people where there aren't really that many major differentiating factors between the various towns. Like you could go from one town to the next and maybe like the dialect would be different or something like that. But generally speaking, like the stores that you'll see, like the konbini and like the home, what would you say, home centers and yeah, that kind of thing. It's very similar. And that's what I felt like when I was going to most places in Oita Prefecture. Like, oh, this town that I'm in, it feels kind of similar to this town that's like right next, the next town over. But when I went to Beppu, it felt fundamentally different. It feels a little bit like Kobe, actually.
Okay.
In the sense that there's the city sandwiched between the mountains and the sea, which kind of makes it unique. And you always kind of have like a nice, unique view. And it's easy to navigate because you've got a reference point with the mountains, even if you can't see the sea. And on top of that, Beppu has the highest concentration of onsen, hot springs in Japan. And so it has a lot of character. It doesn't really feel like any other place in Japan. So I kind of fell in love with Beppu. When I was doing the JET program, I would regularly go to Beppu I would just go to Starbucks there because there was no Starbucks in the town that I was in. And I would practice writing, like creative writing. And I really liked the town and I thought, I want to come back here. I eventually did. I started teaching English at the cram school that friend I mentioned earlier had attended when he was in high school. So he kind of connected me with his teacher there. I taught there for a year. And then after that, I ended up doing student recruitment at APU, Asia Ritsumeikan, Asia Pacific University. So I did that for technically 5 years, although the last year and a half I was on, I forget the term, parental leave because my kids were born. So I was still there in contract, but I wasn't going in doing anything. So yeah.
So that's kind of also this love for Beppu that kept you in Oita and not wanting to move back to Tokyo.
That's correct. That's correct.
I want to start getting a little bit into Japanese language. You said
Sure.
It was your tipping point for staying here, for making it a place you want to stay longer. And today it's still a big part of your work because you've really went all the way towards perfecting the pronunciation and the articulation of it. What was the most challenging for you in the process of learning Japanese?
I think the most challenging thing for me, I should preface this by saying that, one, despite the fact that this was the most challenging thing for me, it's not the thing that I currently have the most difficulty with.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, well, pitch accent, I think, is probably the thing that was most difficult for me, because I didn't know anything about pitch accent, like many people, until I'd already been studying Japanese for about 2 years. And by that point, I had already developed a fair number of bad habits. And as the saying goes, it's significantly more difficult to fix a bad habit than it is to establish a new one. And so there was this whole entire aspect about the Japanese language, the one element of the pronunciation of Japanese that I had essentially had no idea that existed the first 2 years I was studying Japanese. And because I was oblivious to it, I was just making mistakes left and right and assuming that I was saying everything okay, and kind of like embedding these mistakes into my nervous system. So it was very difficult to iron out. I still make a ton of pitch accent mistakes, but it was very difficult to, it's like when you have like a bended piece of metal. In order to get it straight, you can't go back to just the straight angle. You have to go past the angle in order just to get it back, because otherwise it'll go back again. Yeah, exactly. And so I still have a lot of trouble with rhythm in Japanese. I make a lot of mistakes with my Japanese R sounds. Again, that's a pretty good example of how when you establish a bad habit early on, it becomes very difficult to fix. But I think I'm at the point now where, despite the fact that I know I am making these kind of mistakes with when I speak in Japanese, I don't mind it that much because of the level that I believe that I've reached, which I'm happy with. But moreover, because the thing that I'm most interested right now is creative writing in both Japanese and in English. So I could spend a fair amount of time, fixing the R sounds, fixing the remaining pitch accent mistakes, fixing the rhythm mistakes and that kind of thing. But like most things, it's an issue of diminishing returns. So I feel like if my Japanese pronunciation is, I don't know, a 7 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10, I don't know what it is, but in order to get from like a 5 to a 7, maybe that's a year's worth of work. But in order to get from like a 7 to an 8, for the level that I'm at right now, that's probably like 2 years of like solid work with like a language, like professionalist or something like that. So I think that when it comes to Japanese pronunciation, there's definitely, including pitch accent, there's definitely a lot of things that are worth learning early on. But then there are things related to this subject, such as numbers in Japanese, in which there are so many exceptions that even though you could study like pitch accent in numbers, and I've got some videos in my series on Patreon where I teach this, I usually tell people there are so many exceptions to this particular subject that we'll just know that going in, because this might not be the best use of your time depending on what your goals are. So, yeah.
You said that it was very difficult for you to kind of learn pitch accent after not knowing it existed for 2 years. How did you actually end up discovering pitch accent?
Sure. So at the same time that I was taking Japanese at university, the first time I ever took a Japanese class was my second year at university. And at the same time that I was taking that class, I was taking an introduction to linguistics class. And while I was going through that class, the teacher was talking about pronunciation and the different kinds of languages and, the different kinds of accents that exist. And he said, well, for example, English and I believe German as well are stress accent languages, but Japanese and Norwegian are pitch accent languages. And I was like, excuse me? Because I'd been studying Japanese for more than a year at this point. And the thing that all of my Japanese teachers and all of my Japanese textbooks had continued to say was Japanese pronunciation is easy. All the sounds in Japanese are the exact same. Like unlike in English where an A can be a or a or A has, all the vowels have multiple pronunciations. I can be I or I, et cetera, et cetera. But he said, but that's not true in Japanese. All the sounds in Japanese are just, they always have just one pronunciation and they stick to that. But then I learned about this thing called pitch accent and I was like, I wonder what that is, because I asked my Japanese professor about it and he basically said, oh, you don't need to worry about that. And I was like, okay. So I went to the library and I took out a book on Japanese phonology or the phonetics of Japanese. And it had a big section on pitch accent. And just the length of that section alone, like before I even started reading it, I just remember like flipping through like probably like 200 or 300 pages on pitch accent alone. It might have been a pitch accent dictionary, actually, come to think of it. But it just had all these graphs about the pitch accent and all these different patterns. And I was like, none of this is ever covered in my classroom. And so I continued to kind of pester my Japanese teachers about this. And they would basically all tell me like, you don't need to worry about this. Like, this isn't a big deal. But then once I got to study abroad, I did the same thing. And I said, like every time a new word came up, I would say, what's like the accent of this word? And it got to a point where my Japanese teacher at Keio was like, that's it, Dogen. I'm going to open a new class for pitch accent specifically, where I'll teach you and anyone else who's interested in pitch accent. And I was like, perfect, great. And so it was me and this friend, it's probably my closest friend during study abroad, and he was from Ecuador, I believe. It's been so long, I can't remember at this point. I'm almost positive it was Ecuador. But I remember going into that class, and it was the first time where the teacher wanted us to record ourselves speaking Japanese. And she was kind of breaking down the 4 different pitch accent patterns. And she was like, okay, so I want you to say this word, the best, saiko. And I was like, okay, saiko. And she was like, nope, you're not saying it right. You're saying it with the accent at the beginning. It's not saiko, it's saiko. And I was like, okay, saiko. She was like, you're not doing it right. And then she went to my Ecuadorian friend and he said it perfectly. And I was like, what's going on? And then once I heard myself saying it in the recordings, that was the first time that I actually could pick up on the difference. And the fact that I wasn't able to pick up on the difference when I was saying it without the recording was a real shock to me. I think it's kind of similar to how a lot of people aren't comfortable hearing themselves speak, because I believe that there's a slight dissonance between your perception of your voice and your actual voice.
That reminds me of a story when I was living in Cambodia, and Khmer is the language spoken in Cambodia, and very unique, very different from everything we are familiar with. And
sure.
I was staying at the homestay, and the mother was trying to teach me and another person some vocabulary. We'd sit next to each other. She'd say one word, and then I would say it back, and my friend would say it back completely different. And then we would argue, no, she said it this way. And he would say, so I guess this is kind of where it's coming from. It's just kind of, where do you put the intonation? And so if you had to define pitch accent in a sentence or so, what would it be?
Sure. So I think it's most easy, in order to understand this from a non-native Japanese speaker's perspective, the best way is to compare it to a stress accent language. So in English, when we put the stress on a word, we're doing just that. We're putting stress on it, additional force, additional volume. And this typically makes that part of the word a little bit louder and a little bit longer than the surrounding syllables. So if I say tomorrow, for example, and I kind of do what's known as, I can't remember the linguistic term. I think it's slow pronunciation, as simple as that is. But when you kind of really enunciate it, again, it's tomorrow. The ma part of the word is longer than the other parts of the word, and it's louder than the other parts of the word. So the accent in English is defined by the volume and the length compared to the surrounding syllables. But in Japanese, when a word has an accent, it's not defined specifically by the volume or the length, but by the pitch. So in a word like chopsticks, for example, ohashi, the pitch starts low, goes high, and then drops again. And that high pitch, it will often be louder than the surrounding bits, but it's not the loudness, it's not the volume that is the core characteristic, the defining characteristic of the pitch, of the accent. It is the pitch. Japanese is a pitch accent language because the accent in Japanese is defined by the pitch, as opposed to in English or German, in which the accent is defined by the stress. And so even though on paper, Japanese pitch accent, the basics of Japanese pitch accent can be summarized pretty simple, in pretty simple terms. Like there are 4 pitch accent patterns in Japanese. There's a bunch of rules that if you memorize early on will really increase your ability to, what would you say, correctly, to anticipate the correct accent of a word by looking at it, even if you've never heard it. Mm-hmm. And I got really interested in that kind of thing. But I think probably the hardest thing about pitch accent is learning to speak Japanese with pitch accent as opposed to speak Japanese with stress accent. Because again, the rules themselves aren't terribly complicated. It's just that when you're a native English speaker, you're so used to speaking with stress accent. This is why so many people, myself included, will say, for example, Japanese as not Nihongo, which is more or less flat, but we'll say it as Nihongo with the accent on the ho, because we kind of like unconsciously believe that all words need to have accents. This is kind of like the stress accent rules that we're brought up with. And it feels so strange and uncomfortable to us to say certain words without stress, without any kind of accent, let alone a pitch accent. But then on top of that, there are pitch accent patterns in Japanese, for example, the Odaka pattern, in which, like this is super interesting. There are multiple words in Japanese that sound the exact same when you say them in isolation, but when you say them with a particle attached to them, that's when their pronunciation changes. So for example, the words for nose and flower, if you ask a Japanese person, are these pronounced the same? They'll say, hana, hana, yeah. But then if you say, what about if a particle is attached? And they'll go, let's see, nose, hanaga, flower, hanaga. Oh, chigaunda. Like they don't even realize that they're different because of the way that the particle attaches. But that kind of pitch accent pattern is so unlike anything that we're used to in English that it becomes extremely difficult to pick up on unless you're explicitly trained to pick up on it, and or unless you have like a background in music or something like that. It's again why you can be in Japan for 5, 10, 15, 20 years and still say imoto or ototo, even though this is incorrect. It's imoto, ototo. But then when the particle attaches, it's imoto ga or ototo ga. Like the particle attaches low. Again, those words in isolation, they're completely flat. But then when a particle attaches, the pitch starts low, it rises all the way up until the final to, and then it drops in with the attaching particle.
You said that when you first heard of pitch accent and read about this and started bringing it up to your Japanese teacher, your teacher was like, no, you don't need to worry about it.
Yeah.
And in my case, I went to Japanese language school here in Osaka for 1 year.
Yeah.
And it was never mentioned. I had never heard of pitch accent until I came across your videos and you were like emphasizing this.
Yeah.
Why is it not taught in Japanese language education to foreigners?
I think, great question to begin with. I think the main reason is just, it comes down to time. When you are taking a Japanese class, as opposed to doing like an immersion-based approach where you can kind of like structure your life around like learning Japanese, you're working with more or less a limited amount of time. And in that setting, again, it's kind of like diminishing returns. You can speak Japanese and be understandable with mostly incorrect pitch accent, in the same way that someone from China can speak English, or someone from Japan, because we're in Japan right now, can speak English with a Japanese accent and still be understandable. It's just that they'll have an audible accent depending on how long they've studied English, but also the ways in which they've studied English. So I've always told people, you don't need to study pitch accent if you just want to be understandable. You should really only study pitch accent if one of your goals is to sound as native as possible. And like in my class, most of the people didn't really care about that. They were kind of like, well, I just want to be able to get my point across. So like, I don't want to learn this. But that was never me. I was always like, I want to get at least to, this particular level. And I knew that in order to do that, I would have to study pronunciation and thus pitch accent somewhat intensively. And so again, but if you're taking a Japanese class at university or something like that, and you're maybe you have, like, for example, when I took Japanese at the University of Washington, I think I was taking like 3 or 4 hours, maybe more than that, 5 hours of Japanese a week, more or less an hour of Japanese a day. But if you have an hour a day, there's so much to cover. You got to cover vocab, you got to cover grammar, you got to cover reading, you got to cover writing. And then again, with something like pitch accent or pronunciation, it's just kind of like, this is only for the people that really, really want to go that extra mile and want to sound as native as they possibly can. And because of that, I think the teachers more or less would always say, well, it's just something that we don't really have time to cover. And even if we did cover it, it's something that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily,
it's the diminishing returns you talked about.
Yeah, it's the diminishing returns, but it would also necessarily eat into the time dedicated to the other subjects. So maybe their grammar would suffer, maybe their vocab would suffer or something like that. And then, I was going to say one more thing related to that. Yes, the other thing is that there had never really been, arguably, a rubric for teaching pitch accent.
Oh, interesting.
Because there had been plenty of pitch accent resources that were out there for those that were interested in learning that, but most of them required either an already advanced level of Japanese in order to understand, like a Japanese pitch accent dictionary, for example. It's in Japanese, like the rules are described in Japanese. But then the other resources would be like Japanese linguistics books aimed at grad students that had already graduated with like a degree in Japanese linguistics or something like that. And they were trying, like, I don't know, they were doing like their research on a very advanced thing within Japanese, like, I don't know, rendaku or something like that. And so I believe that it's a combination of the diminishing returns, but also not having kind of like an easy way to teach things in the context of a classroom setting. And so it's actually interesting. Over the course of the past 7 or 8 years, I've noticed that more and more Japanese resources are beginning to cover pitch accent. And I think that it's because more and more people are talking about it, whether that's me or my friend Matt versus Japan, or other people on YouTube. It's always been there. It's just that there are more people now that are openly talking about it. And because of that, there are more people that can make educated decisions about whether or not they want to study it. Because again, it really comes down to what are your personal goals?
No, you got me curious about the pitch accent, and Japan has many dialects.
Sure.
Does pitch accent vary depending on the dialects?
Yes,
like
it does.
Kansai Ben or Fukuoka Ben?
100%. And it's interesting because some people make the argument that you don't need to study pitch accent because of what you just said, because pitch accent is different depending on the region of Japan that you're in. So, and yet Japanese people are still able to communicate with each other, even if they're not speaking in standard Japanese. So it's unnecessary to study. The thing that I always like to bring up is that, yes, but generally speaking, well, first, foreigners in 99.99% of settings are studying standard Japanese, which means that's kind of like where their base is. And because of that, they're already like leaning in that direction. Now, that being said, the other part of the argument is that the people that are speaking, for example, in Kansai Ben, they're typically speaking consistently in Kansai Ben. But if you've never studied pitch accent and you're studying Japanese in a more or less typical Japanese program, you're going to be, again, studying standard Japanese, but what'll happen is your Japanese will often sound fragmented. Because again, if I say the word for yesterday in standard Japanese, it's kino or kino, depending on how it's being used. It actually changes its pronunciation if it's being used in certain ways. But I believe in Osaka, it's kino. And that's a different word in standard Japanese. That's the word for function in standard Japanese. Kino in standard Japanese is function, and kino is yesterday. And so if I'm speaking standard Japanese, but every now and then I'm speaking with the pitch accent from a different region, unbeknownst to me, it sounds quite fragmented. And one of the ways that I like to explain this is that right now I'm speaking English with like a Western United States accent. Mm-hmm. But if I started speaking like this with a Southern accent, it sounds very different. And then I can't really do a good like English accent, but it's a little bit, it's not that extreme, but it's kind of like that.
It's recognizable.
Yes. It's like your Japanese will sound fragmented to a certain degree. Again, it's not as dramatic as I just explained, but that's one way to help learners visualize it. The argument against studying pitch accent, because there are different pitch accent dialects in different areas of Japan, yes, but the people that live there typically speak with just that dialect. And unless you've spent all of your Japanese studies with that dialect in particular, it's likely that you won't sound like that. It's likely that you'll sound somewhat fragmented, which will come across as, again, unnatural.
You reached a very high level of Japanese language ability, and also in terms of pronunciation that sounds native to me as a non-native Japanese speaker. Have you ever been in situations where people don't see you when you talk to them, and they kind of are shocked or surprised to hear that you're actually a foreigner after getting to meet you?
Yes, but I should preface this by saying that, one, there are a lot of foreigners in Japan with much better Japanese than me. For example, my friend Ananya.
We talked to Ananya.
Oh, did you?
Last week, I think.
Okay.
Last
She definitely has better Japanese than me in terms of like pronunciation, but also eloquency in general. She's a great example. There's a girl, I can't remember her name. She's from Austria. She's been in like a couple of YouTube videos. She was in Takashi's video. Mm-hmm. Matt versus Japan. He definitely has better Japanese than me. So first, I just like to kind of preface things by saying my Japanese is pretty good, but at the same time, there are definitely people with better Japanese than me. And in the instances in which I get people mistakenly think that I'm Japanese, it's usually when it's a conversation that I've had dozens and dozens of times before, and it's a short conversation, because I can only go so long before people start to pick up on the non-Japanese, artifacts in my Japanese. So again, like my R sounds, I often actually consciously will say things in order to get around the R sounds because I know that I'm bad at saying them.
Interesting.
Yeah. So for example, like the passive form of eat, 食べられる. That's られる. Like 3 R sounds in a row. And when I'm concentrating, I can sometimes get it okay. But maybe rather than saying like, that thing was eaten by him, like, それを彼に食べられた. Like, I might just say, いや、彼が食べた. Like, I would choose an expression where I can kind of express the same idea, but I can get away with less R sounds.
I see.
Yeah, so there's like kind of like tricks that, and I actually talk about this in my series a little bit, where there are, like another good example of this is that there are multiple words in Japanese that have multiple acceptable pitch accent patterns. Like you can say it this way, or you can say it this way. And I say, choose the pronunciation, the pitch accent pattern that's easier for you, and stick with it. Because not only will you not get lost, not only will you not be like, wait, which one was it again? But because it's the one that you're stronger with to begin with, you'll be playing into your strengths, so to speak. But yeah, it's usually quick conversations on the phone that I've had dozens and dozens of times, and I can anticipate like the thing that I need to be saying and that kind of thing. But I think that most Japanese people over the phone would be able to pick up on the fact that I'm not a native speaker within, I don't know, 2 minutes or so. And that might come as like a shock to some of the people that are under the impression that my Japanese is better than it actually is. But I think that's because, well, one of the things is that, again, the difference between like 80% native and 90% native, on paper, that's, 10%. But in terms of like how much, again, it's the diminishing returns. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I do think that my Japanese is probably better than most foreigners, Japanese that live in Japan. That being said, again, there are thousands, probably tens of thousands of foreigners with Japanese just as good, if not better than mine. And yeah, good for them.
You discover a passion for pitch accent when studying Japanese, and when you go on a JET program, you discover your love for beppu, and you've been on this journey ever since. Yeah. When did content creation come into play? When did Dogen start on YouTube?
Great question. So I didn't know what I wanted to do until study abroad. When I was studying Japanese by myself, when I was 14 years old, there was a band called Softball. That it was a punk Japanese girls band that I got really, really into. And it was like my goal to go to a softball show one day when I was older. They broke up before I got to come to Japan. But when I came to Japan during study abroad, and once my Japanese got to a certain level, I learned that they had broken up, but the main singer, who was kind of 90% of the band, so to speak, like the singer, the songwriter, did most things in the band in terms of like the creation of the music. She had formed a new band that was more or less, it was just kind of like a rebrand kind of thing. And when I learned that, I was like, oh God, I got to go to one of these shows. And I actually wrote them a really long letter. And I said, I learned Japanese because I wanted to go to one of your shows when I was older. And now I'm having like the time of my life in Japan. And I'd like to thank you so much for inspiring me to do this. It's really made like a tremendous beneficial impact in my life. And they, like, I it was like on their MySpace, I think. I sent them like this really long message, and they were like, come to the next show. We want to meet you. I was like, oh my God. And so I went to the show, and it was like this life-changing experience to me. And for me, after the show was over, they invited me out to like go to izakaya with them, because it's like a very small indies band. So like the venue for the show itself was maybe like 50 people or something like that.
Like kind of underground punk.
Yes, yeah, very underground kind of punk thing. And so I got the opportunity to talk to the main singer for probably close to an hour and a half, if not 2 hours at length, about all sorts of different topics. And one of the things that she said to me was, well, I asked her, why did you want to become a singer? And she said, I have an older brother who is a salaryman, and he has a very comfortable life, and he's doing well. And I have a sister who also works in an office setting, and she's in kind of similar circumstances. She's doing well because of the work that she's doing, but neither of them will ever get the kind of letter that you wrote me. And I was like,
wow.
Oh, yeah, it was like a really kind of like profound moment. I was like, wow, yeah. And one of the things that I had been doing at the time is I had a blog, and unbeknownst, like I was never really conscious of this, but I had always kind of enjoyed writing. Like when I was in 4th grade, I remember we had to write like a short story about like something that we did during summer break or something like that. And it was like, write 10 pages on notebook paper, standard size notebook paper about something that you did. And I spent like a month, like 3 or 4 weeks, and I wrote like a 50-page story about like this going down to visit that cousin that I mentioned earlier, yeah. Going down to visit him in Texas and going to like Six Flags with him. And that was like, there was like 5 pages dedicated to like the plane ride over. And like, I'd always just kind of enjoyed writing. And I got kind of thinking like, maybe I should try and get into like writing a little bit more. Like I didn't realize that I could write something that would be so meaningful to someone who was so meaningful to me. And so I started taking it a little bit more serious. And when I got back to the United States, I took a Japanese modern, like contemporary literature class. And there was a short story that I read there in that class called Minku by the Japanese author. I don't know how to pronounce her name. I don't know if it's Kanehara or Kanehara, but yeah, Kanehara Hitomi. And it just blew me out of the water how creative it was. It was written from the perspective of the protagonist is schizophrenic. And it's like, I don't know, maybe a 15 or 20 page short story, but every like 3 or 4 pages, it ends with, and actually that was all in my mind, and this is what's actually happening. So like the first like 3 pages are like the protagonist having more or less like a mental breakdown on like a train platform in Japan, and like murdering the guy that's like pushing him into the oncoming train and killing him, but then being like, but this was all like an illusion in my head, and I would never actually do that. And I'm just actually going to get onto this train and like silently like be a good person and like go to my appointment at like the psychiatrist or whatever. And then she, like the next couple pages are like dedicated to like her on the train, like listening to like the conversations, like eavesdropping on the people that are like talking around her. And like there's like a couple that are like kind of like talking about their wedding arrangements and stuff like that. And she's kind of like, the things that they're saying are kind of like triggering these traumatic experiences in the protagonist's own past. But then after like 3 or 4 pages of that, she says, and of course, all of that was in my mind as well. And I actually came to my psychiatrist by taxi. And it just keeps happening. But she writes so well and so convincingly that it's a surprise each time.
You get absorbed into
yeah. And I was like, this is incredible. And because I have kind of like an obsessive personality. So like the first thing that I ever got obsessed with was martial arts tricking, the thing that I talked about earlier. And the next thing that I got obsessed with was Japanese, the Japanese language. And then the thing that I got obsessed with after that was creative writing. And because I was obsessed with two other things before that, I actually, and I still probably am not, but during those times, I didn't read a lot of books. I was all in like martial arts. It was everything, martial arts all the time. And again, like Japanese language, pitch accent, like, okay, I want to get perfect pitch accent. I want to get perfect pronunciation, at least as far as I can go. And so during the time where, you know, in like my English classes in high school or in university, again, we're reading like Crime and Punishment and stuff like that. I'm reading it. I'm doing what's necessary in order to like get the grade. But that's like, I'm not in a position where I can appreciate it because my heart's not in it, basically. Mm-hmm. But then as soon as like my heart does get into it, I start like, because again, I have like an obsessive personality, I just became like overwhelmed with like how incredible creative writing and fiction can be. And I just got like the last year of university, I took a bunch of creative writing classes. And one of the things that really stuck with me during that time is that my teacher told me, you're trying too hard. Like you clearly didn't read a lot when you were growing up, and now you're trying too hard, but it's backfiring. You're trying to use these like overly complicated words and trying to sound intelligent, but it's not working. It's very bare, like we can see you flexing, basically. But the comment that I received from multiple teachers and actually another friend after graduating from university was, when you write comedy, you're actually kind of good at it. And I think it's actually because it was the exact opposite of when I was trying to write in a serious way. When I was writing comedy, because we had assignments where we did have to write comedy, it was kind of free of the affectations that were in the more serious things, because I wanted to be like Ernest Hemingway, or I wanted to be like, I don't know, like again, Kanehara Hitomi or Mishima Yukio, or like whoever it might be, like these genius writers that I could never actually even get like, not even close to. So I was trying to like kind of overcompensate, but it was just always backfiring. But when my teachers, again, they said, when you're doing comedy, you don't try as hard, and you've got kind of like a knack for it. I remember the expression my teacher said was, you know how to crack the whip. And I was like, oh, because I was never a funny kid growing up. It was like the very last thing I ever expected multiple people to tell me, like, you're a funny person. I was like, no, I'm not.
So you have that encounter with a punk rock singer that's kind of inspiring you to create something for others. And
yes.
Then you have this passion for creative writing, mm-hmm. and this discovery of maybe talent for comedy writing. Mm-hmm. And YouTube is the platform. Yes. And you kind of decided to bring it all onto
Yeah. So again, earlier, I think I mentioned that when I was on the JET program, I would regularly go to Starbucks and just like write there. And that's because my goal during that time of my life was to become an author, like a fiction writer. I wanted to become a published author in Japanese. And because of that, I spent basically all my free time just doing short stories, writing short stories in Japanese. And about half of them were serious things that, again, kind of fell into that vein of like, you're trying too hard, this isn't very good. But the other half was, again, like I'd go to Starbucks and write about like the people I saw, or like I have a video about this actually on YouTube. It's called Starbucks Accident. And it's like a short story of me like pretending. It's a fictional story about me pooping in my pants at Starbucks and trying to hide it from the people around me. And by the time that I finished the JET program, I probably had like 20 or 30 of those like short stories. And I self-published something on Amazon where it was kind of like a collection of all those. And they got decent reviews. But despite the fact that they got mostly positive reviews, like I think the average for all of them is between 4 and 5 stars, I never made a substantial amount of money from them. And so I kind of saw the world trending towards video. And I was like, I wonder if these same scripts would do better in video form. And I was like, maybe what I could do is deliver these videos in kind of like a rakugo kind of format, where it's just me talking to the camera, but kind of like acting out these like short stories that I wrote. So probably like the first like 20 or 30 videos that I made on YouTube were short stories that I had written like 5 or 6 years prior on the JET program. And I guess my hypothesis about them doing better in video form was correct, because the same videos on YouTube, or the same exact story on YouTube, got a lot more exposure than it did on Amazon. Part of that, it just comes down to like the way that YouTube is kind of laid out and the fact that it's free, and well, there's many factors involved. But once I saw that, I was like, okay, I'm going to lean into it, because this allows me to continue to do the creative writing, but I might actually be able to properly monetize this. Whereas not properly monetize, because I was properly monetizing the short stories, but make an actual significant amount of money from this.
You focus on comedy writing on YouTube, and,
yes.
and a lot of your skits revolve around like cultural differences or play on words, which is one of your expertise. How do you come up with these ideas? Do you interact with a lot of people on the street and kind of take notes of those interactions and then transfer them into skits? Is it just pure imagination?
We briefly talked about this before we started rolling, but I think a lot of it comes down to kind of like personality. I think maybe myself and Ricciardo, who I believe you also interviewed, are probably quite similar in this regard, where part of it comes like naturally, in the sense of, you know, when something, well, 99% of scripts are kind of, what's happening right now is a perfect example. And what I mean by this is, I have always overthought, again, perfect example. I think too much about the words that I use, whether that's in writing form or when I'm talking to someone.
I think the quote you gave me before we started rolling is, what makes you a good comedy writer, it was what makes you a bad speaker.
Exactly. What makes me a good comedic writer makes me a bad speaker, because when it comes to comedy, but also I guess all kinds of written work, every single word matters. I have probably the most viral tweet that I ever wrote was, Japan's greatest tragedy is having the world's best toilets and no Mexican food. What's the point of owning a Ferrari if you never take it to the track? And I think a lot of people are under the impression that I like have that idea and I'm like, oh, that's pretty funny, and like I write it. But even a tweet that short, I revised that for 2 weeks, because I knew that had the potential. I knew that was a funny joke, but I also knew that in order to extract all of the humor, all of the potential of the joke, every single word had to be perfect. And so again, the tweet was, Japan's greatest tragedy is having the world's best toilets and no Mexican food. What's the point of owning a Ferrari if you never take it to the track? The original tweet was something more along the lines of, the biggest tragedy in Japan is having the greatest toilets and no Mexican food. Just that. And it didn't have the reinforcement with the Ferrari bit. And I was like, first of all, it's clumsy to begin with. Japan's greatest tragedy is so much stronger than the greatest tragedy in Japan. It's so much stronger from the outset. But then on top of that, again, the lack of reinforcement from a different angle with the metaphor at the end, that's what really brings it home. That's what really gives like the additional laugh. But then that was originally, I knew that I wanted to make some kind of metaphor with like a car or something like that. But again, I spent a long time thinking about that because it's like, what kind of car? I know that it wants to be a supercar. What's the point of owning a supercar if you never take it to the track? No, not specific enough. What's the point of owning a Supra if you never take it to the track? That's good because it's specific to Japan, which relates to the joke because it's a joke about Japan. But how many people know what a Supra is compared to how many people know what a Ferrari is? And I was like, nope, it's got to be Ferrari because more people know what a Ferrari is. But then on top of that, in just kind of like when you compare those cars side by side, Ferrari is the better performing car. And so again, going back to what I said like a minute or two ago, I overthink words, and that's a curse in a setting like this, but it's a blessing. It's a gift when I'm in front of my computer and I'm writing a comedic script or a non-comedic script, because I've spent so long being extremely conscious of words that it now is kind of like this unconscious thing. And it's why I stumble so much when I talk, because I'm constantly second guessing myself as I speak. Like, no, it should be this word. Oh, but if I start talking about this, I should preface it by saying this, and et cetera, et cetera. For example, another kind of example of this is that when I got the email from you guys, one of the things that I truly appreciated was how professional it was. But then on top of that, and I guess in the same vein, is that it didn't have any emojis. I haven't used an emoji, unironically, in probably 7 years, because I believe that emojis often end up becoming crutches for difficult to articulate emotions. Like rather than using words to express a quip that could be much more funny. Like, I don't know, we recently had the United States election. Maybe we're talking about like something that happened in our personal lives that was either something that we were happy about or disappointed about. I could reference the election, and I could be like, if something positive happened to me and I was happy with how the election results turned out, and I was with people that were also happy about that, I could be like, I haven't been this happy since the election. Or if it was the opposite thing, I haven't been this sad since the election. It's like I could do a callback, and I could do a callback with words to articulate an emotion or an idea, a thought that is a little bit more nuanced. Or I could do the same thing in like a crying, smiling emoji. That's so much easier to do, but it becomes a crutch.
You obviously spend a lot of time and effort to choosing your words carefully when you do writing. And if you need 2 weeks to write a tweet, how much work goes into one of the skits that people see on YouTube?
Well, it really depends on the video, because many videos often, it's more about the idea and seeing the idea from different angles. So like that tweet, it has one joke that can only be expressed in one way before it starts to become redundant. And what I mean by that is I like to think that I ended up choosing the combination of words that does bring out all of the potential in the irony that Japan does have the world's greatest toilets and no Mexican food. Mm-hmm. Now, for example, like a video that I made recently, there's been a lot of videos on YouTube that have been going really popular that have been going viral recently. It's like how I studied Japanese and became fluent in a year or something like that. Or just how I studied Japanese. And I thought I should do the same thing. I should make a video about that, but I should make a comedic video about that. And it's like 20 or 30 different lines that are all like kind of like the stereotypical things that Japanese learners will go through. It's like, I ran away from the NHK man when he showed up at my doorstep. I watched like these adult videos that had like this, XYZ, like the weird mosaic thing or whatever. I can't remember the jokes from that video right now, but it's one joke told in like 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 different ways. And that's kind of like a different approach than the Twitter approach. So you can often milk ideas. And when it comes to something a lot more broad, like how I studied Japanese, there's a lot of comedy to be had there. But again, when it comes to something more specific, the irony of Japan having great toilets but no Mexican food, you can't re-articulate that multiple times without losing some of the impact each consecutive time. And so the original question was like, how long do you spend on each comedic script? But again, because many of the comedic videos are based on ideas that are a little bit more wide, I guess, I don't need to spend as much time with each idea, I guess. Yeah.
Your content is in Japanese. You always put English subtitles, and you do a lot of play on words and do all of these, and talk about topics that are very relevant to Japan. So for me as a foreigner living in Japan, I can relate to so much of it. Okay. But who would you say your content is for? Are you kind of doing this more with a Japanese audience in mind? Is it more a Western audience in mind? Or it doesn't matter?
That's another really great question. It's for me. And what I mean by that is, I always screw this up when I try and say this, but there's an expression that more or less says, when you try and appeal to everyone, you end up appealing to no one. Mm-hmm. And I think that Hayao Miyazaki said something similar when he was talking about like Spirited Away. They said like, who did you make this movie for? Like adults love it, like kids love it, college students love it, teenagers love it. Like, how did you make a movie that appeals to like so many people? And he said, because I made it specifically for 12-year-old girls. It's like the narrower the strike zone is, the larger the appeal is actually in many instances, because it's so specific, because it's so concrete, it actually ends up becoming fleshed out to an extent where it finally becomes believable. It finally becomes enthralling, like interesting. And I think the same thing is true for comedy. Every time that I try and write a joke, I never think about, will like this group of foreigners like it, or like will the Japanese audience like it? It's always my yardstick. It's, do I think this is funny? And because of that, there's a lot of jokes that go over people's heads. Like there's a ton of jokes that Japanese people don't get at all. There's many jokes that foreigners don't get. And there's also a fair number of jokes that you have to be more or less completely fluent in both languages to fully appreciate, because it might be like a layered joke. Mm-hmm. Like kind of what I did with like the video with Takashi. Yeah. Like the recent video with him, it was kind of, it's a misunderstanding about, I think he's talking about adult like pornographic actresses, and he thinks that we're having a conversation about Japanese politicians. And so, for example, there's a line in that video, and the misunderstanding comes from the fact that adult woman in Japanese and Japanese politician, that sounds quite similar. Like an adult woman is seijin josei, and kind of like current political affairs is seiji josei. So it's quite similar.
If you don't pay close attention, you might kind of missed the two words.
Exactly. So the premise of the video is that I misheard him, and we started having this conversation, kind of thinking we were talking about the same thing, but speaking past each other. But there's a bit in that video, for example, where he says like, well, who do you like? Like, and he's asking me like, what Japanese politicians do you like? And I'm hearing that as, what Japanese pornographic actresses do you like? And he says, Tanaka-san toka. And there's a famous Japanese politician named Tanaka Kakue. He's like a very famous Japanese politician who's become kind of more or less a legend. And I said, there's also a very famous Japanese adult actress named Tanaka Hitomi. And that's who I thought he was talking about. And so it's layered in the sense of it works on both the political level, but it also works on the in terms of the adult industry. But if you don't know anything about Japanese politicians, you don't realize that he's not just saying a random popular Japanese name. It's like actually there's history behind that name. Yeah, so there's a fair number of jokes like that where I write it because I know that there's like, even though the strike zone is extremely, extremely narrow, I know that for the people that can hit that strike zone, so to speak, who have that knowledge, it's hysterical. Because again, like if you do know who Tanaka Kakue is, but you also know who Tanaka Hitomi is, and then you re-watch that video on the second go through and you know what the misunderstanding is.
A lot of people in the comments were saying exactly that watching it a second time after knowing how it ends was even more funny.
Exactly. And so like half of the jokes are kind of, it's just kind of like, they come from the misunderstanding. Like Takashi says, I mean, like they're all acting after all. Like I can't, because, politicians often act. And so he says, it's all like an act. Like I can't really get into that. And I'm like, well, yeah, but I think like, these days, like everyone knows it's an act. So like, what's the big deal? Like that's kind of an instance of kind of like a more like surface level joke. Whereas again, like the Tanaka Kakue thing, like that's more like you have to have the additional knowledge to appreciate it at all levels. But again, going back to the original question, it's never about whether or not the audience will pick up on everything. It's whether or not I've done my best to get it to the point where I think it's the best that it can be given my ability.
You went into YouTube as an outlet for your creative writing, and you use that kind of platform to do that. And for many years, I think you've done this while still working as an English teacher.
I did creative writing on the JET program while I was teaching English. But when I started YouTube, I had already quit teaching English and I had been doing student recruitment at APU.
At the university. But you were working.
That's correct.
When came the time when you decided to, okay, this is it. I want to go full time on YouTube and dedicate myself to writing? Because from what you were saying earlier, you went into YouTube as an outlet, but also you had in mind the idea of you want to become an author, you want to kind of make a living from your writing.
So in terms of the timing, when I quit doing student recruitment and started doing YouTube full time, I'm in kind of a unique situation where, unlike most of my friends on YouTube who make the majority of their income either through YouTube AdSense, which requires 8-minute or longer videos, or people like Mr. Yabatan, who does shorter videos, but does a lot of like product sponsorships and that kind of thing. I'm kind of in this other zone entirely where I do videos that are too short to monetize. Like I can do like one ad at the beginning and I guess one ad at the end, but most of the money that's to be made in YouTube generally comes from the unskippable ads in videos that are 8 minutes or longer. And the overwhelming majority of my videos are 3 minutes or less. So it's very difficult for me to make any kind of substantial amount of money on YouTube. And it always has been, because my videos have always been that long. And so like even now with like 600,000 subscribers on YouTube, I make like, I don't know, on a good month, like $1,000 on YouTube. But early on, one of the things that happened is that when I had like, I don't know, 2,000 subscribers or something like that, I woke up one day and I had like 1,000 more subscribers than I had the previous day. And I was like, what's going on? And someone in the comments said, I came here from Reddit. This is hysterical. And I went over to Reddit in the Japanese, Learn Japanese Reddit. And someone had posted one of my videos and they said, this guy is surprisingly funny. And a bunch of people said, how did you learn Japanese? Because your Japanese pronunciation is better than most of the foreigners that I've seen on this platform and or in my Japanese class. And it immediately made sense to me because I was the only person that I knew, besides my friend from Ecuador, that had ever studied pitch accent. And this was also as YouTube was becoming more popular. So these days, it's much easier to immerse yourself in Japanese because you can turn on YouTube and listen to Japanese 24/7 or Netflix or whatever it might be, Crunchyroll. But again, like when I was growing up, it was very difficult to do that because I would have to put like a physical VHS, like a Japanese movie on repeat or something like that, or listen to like very mundane Japanese lessons on repeat. Because there just wasn't a lot of like Japanese engaging content, native Japanese engaging content that I could immerse myself in. I did my best, but at the same time, there was a limit to that. And again, it really helps having a lot of different resources at your disposal. Anyway, one of the reasons that I was able to get to the point that I was at is because, again, I did study Japanese pronunciation and pitch accent intensively. And so I just said that. I said, I actually studied this part of Japanese intensively. And someone said, you know, I really like your content. You should consider making a Patreon. I didn't know what a Patreon was at the time. So I looked into it and I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. Maybe I should make one of these. But I also wasn't terribly fond of the idea of kind of more or less just having like a tip jar on the internet, being like, here I am making content. Why don't you give me money? I thought, if I really want to be getting any kind of money from people, I want to be offering them some kind of like tangible value. And at the same time, I recognized how difficult, like all the struggles that I went through learning pitch accent because of the reasons that we talked about earlier. You either had to already have a degree in Japanese, and or be so fluent in Japanese that you could learn, that you could read like these Japanese pitch accent resources. Mm-hmm. And so I thought there's kind of a business opportunity here, so to speak, because this is something that no Japanese programs are offering. And for the people that are interested in it, it's extremely valuable. Again, if you're not interested in sounding as native as possible, if that's not like one of your most important goals, then yeah, it's definitely not necessary. And there are many people, maybe not many, but there are instances of people who have been able to get better Japanese than me without studying pitch accent. That being said, I do think that these kind of people tend to be the outliers rather than the normal, than the norm, because if that wasn't the case, then there wouldn't be so many foreigners in Japan that have been here so long that still regularly make pitch accent mistakes. But I'm kind of rambling. So long story short, I made a Patreon where I taught pitch accent. And I would advertise that at the very end of each of my comedic videos. The comedic videos ended up becoming advertisements for this practical pronunciation and pitch accent course, which was kind of, maybe still is, a kind of one-of-a-kind thing on the internet. And because of that, and because there wasn't a lot of people at the time that were kind of doing what I was doing, now there are other people like Richardo, who is way funnier than me. He's so funny. But anyway, at the time, there wasn't that many people doing it. So I kind of had like my own kind of niche, so to speak. And that worked out really well. And once my YouTube, not my YouTube money, but my Patreon money, the income that I was making from that met the income that I was making from my APU salary, I was like, okay, that's it, because the numbers were trending up. And I thought, well, if they're trending up, I should try and maximize this, because not only do I have the potential to maintain my APU salary, but doing so with something that I'm actually passionate about, but I have the opportunity to exceed my APU salary. And I was able to, fortunately, make that happen. And it also happened to coincide nicely with the birth of my twin daughters. So as I mentioned earlier, I quit APU. I stopped working there, but they offer paid leave. Mm-hmm. And so I stepped away for the remaining 18 months. They offer 18 months. And my kids happened to be born almost like to the day, 18 months before my contract ran out. And so I took the parental leave or maternal leave or whatever it's called, and I just concentrated everything on YouTube and Patreon and the Pitch Accent course. And I've been very fortunate in the sense that it's gone well, more or less, since then.
For a lot of creators that, well, actually most creators do this part-time on the side while working full-time.
Yep. Yeah.
And for many, when they make the jump to full-time, something changes a little bit, because suddenly you have the pressure. Well, your income depends on this. And we were talking with another content creator recently who was saying that, you know, some people suddenly have a contract. They need to produce 4 videos with 4 inserts for specific brands, and they need to create videos just for the sole purpose of meeting the contract requirements, or they don't get paid. Has going full-time changed anything for you, or has it just given you more space to create and maybe do some more diverse kind of videos?
I would say the latter, because again, I rarely do sponsorships because my videos are so short that, like, I did one service that I love and I actually use is TransferWise. It's basically an app that you can use to convert like dollars to yen, yen to dollars, back and forth, other currencies as well. And I've been using it for years because it's so much more competitive and convenient than bank transfers and PayPal. And so I reached out to them. I was like, I love your product. And like, I'd been on their mailing list for like new updates or whatever. And they came out with like this update, I don't know, like 3 or 4 months ago at this point, where you can now do transfers of the equivalent of $10,000 or more in yen. And that's a pretty big deal. For example, I recently bought a car in Japan. And because I get all my money in USD, I had to transfer all that money into yen. And TransferWise was great for that because, again, I could do that in one go. But when I made that video, not the car video, but the initial TransferWise video, it was like a 2-minute video that was like a comedic bit about Japanese banks. And it was funny because I thought it was pretty funny. And one of my most popular videos, if not my most popular video on YouTube, is about Japanese banks.
Okay.
And how inefficient they can be. And so I thought, well, this would be like a great combination. It'll be another video about Japanese banks. There's a ton of source material there for comedy. But then I'll also be able to talk about TransferWise, this service that I actually love. And I think that my audience, maybe, I don't know, 30% or so of which are foreigners in Japan. So it's kind of like a win-win. And because the comedic video was like 2 minutes and the sponsorship was like 8 minutes, because I was trying to get I was earnestly trying to explain like why I think it's such a good thing. Everyone was like, you're such a sellout. Like, how much did they pay you? Like, I can't believe you put up something like this. Like, this isn't a comedic video with like a sponsorship. This is a sponsorship with like a comedic video attached to it. And I totally get the critique, but it's just kind of, it goes back to your original question, which is that my videos have never really done well with sponsorships because they're so short. But at the same time, I've been fortunate enough where it hasn't really mattered because the majority of my income has always come from a product that seamlessly integrates with my own content and is a product that I also created.
So that's interesting, because then basically you've retained your freedom to create, at least financially. But you brought up another interesting example where it seems your audience has a specific expectation for the content they want from you.
Yes.
Because you've created those comedic bits, usually in a very similar setting, similar kind of attitude, and they know there's a pun coming, they know there's something that's going to happen at the end of the video. So if you stray away from this format, maybe they are not so happy anymore. Do you feel like because of that, there are videos that you want to do that you can't really do, or that you are refraining yourself from doing?
Yes and no. And what I mean by that is, maybe this will be kind of an interesting topic to potentially end on. Again, I always wanted to be a storyteller. I wanted to do creative writing, and I wanted to do fiction. And I was one of the people fortunate enough to be able to more or less make that happen in a way with the way that the stars aligned with my comedic content on YouTube. I'm not really doing so much like storytelling, but I am able to monetize my situation in a way that I can also end up more or less comfortably take care of my family by doing something that I'm pretty passionate about, which is, or I would say it's the thing that I'm next most passionate about, which is comedy. And well, kind of just like writing in general, but I'm most passionate about storytelling. Now, the thing with my current situation is that because things have been going pretty well for a long time, I didn't really realize that I had stopped doing the storytelling because I had kids. And do you have kids?
Not yet.
Okay. So
soon.
I have twin daughters. And again, I made the transition to full-time creator around the same time that my kids were born. And the first 4 years or so of my daughter's life were so hectic that I don't remember any of it. Like with, when you have kids, everyone tells you, get a lot of sleep, because once they're born, you won't be able to sleep at all.
Yeah.
And I was like, ha ha ha, like, what do you know? I've already, like, I'm already working 2 jobs, like, doing like student recruitment during the day and then like YouTube at night. Like I'll be fine. I'll be ready for it. I wasn't ready for it. And it's a double whammy with twins, because as soon as one of them falls asleep, the other one wakes up. And so I don't exaggerate when I say that the first month I was probably getting less than 3 hours of sleep a night. And I think for the first year, if I got 6 hours of sleep a night, that was like a really good night's sleep, relatively speaking. Now, since then, I've been able to kind of like calm down. But again, those first 4 years or so, it was really, 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 really difficult, because it was this weird balance of trying to make things work in a way that it wasn't too much work for my wife, because raising twins, baby twins, that in itself is a full-time job. But then on top of that, I had my full-time job, but I was also in a situation where I could often help because I was my own boss, and I could, step away from a script or whatever to change a diaper or whatever it might be. That ended up becoming one of my main jobs, diaper changing. But the first 4 years or so were so busy that every week or the first 3 years or so that I was doing YouTube, I think that I didn't miss an upload ever. Maybe, I don't know if it was 2 years or 3 years, but I went a long time always uploading a video every single week on Monday, no matter what. And I wanted to continue doing that after my kids were born, but it just became impossible. And it stopped from being about once a week to once every 2 weeks, or I don't know, once every 10 days or something like that. But just like doing that, like getting a video out felt like such a big accomplishment because, again, I was running on fumes for like 4 years, basically. And at the same time, I was also creating new videos for the Patreon course because there were many things that when I was teaching pitch accent, I taught it how I learned it, but then I realized after the fact that there might have been a better way to teach it to people depending on their unique situation.
So you started reflecting on this, fine-tuning the course.
Yeah, so I started fine-tuning the course. There were many lessons that I went and I ended up revising. Originally, the course was all with my recordings, like for the example words. Like I would say, oha, shi, or whatever. But then I ended up going through the entire course, 80 lessons or whatever it is, and replacing all of those. I hired a professional, like trained native speaker to do everything. So that took a lot of work doing all of that. But then again, completely redoing several lessons, adding lessons that needed to be there to kind of like properly lay the foundation. And then doing that in addition to the full-time YouTube. I was running on fumes for a very long time, for four years or so. And because I was so just like more or less like doing a nonstop sprint all the time, I didn't even really realize that I was no longer doing the storytelling that I wanted to do. It was all just kind of like, well, this is like my life now or whatever. And I like doing the comedy. I like teaching Japanese. I'm having a good time. I'm providing for my family. Let's keep going with it. Mm-hmm. But then something happened to me almost 2 years ago at this point, because we're at the end of October right now. And
November.
That's right. I apologize. I mentioned October because I was hospitalized 2 years ago in October because I have a skin disease called Bowen's disease, and I had to go into the hospital and get like a section of skin cut out. It's kind of like a very, very early form of skin cancer. It's not terribly serious, but I did have to like stay in a hospital for a few days and get some like skin cut out. And while I was there, I watched Cyberpunk Edgerunners.
Okay.
The anime on Netflix. My friend Chris Broad was talking about it. I want to say that Joey the Anime Man was talking about it. I'm almost positive that Giguk, also from Trash Taste, was talking about it. And everyone was saying, this is really good. And I was like, okay, I need something to watch while I'm in the hospital. So I downloaded it all beforehand and then I watched it. And I thought it was amazing. But then I watched it leading up to my surgery. And I had the surgery. And again, it wasn't like a terribly like serious thing, but at the same time, I had to get like, I don't know, like 18 different like anesthesia shots,
wow.
Numb the area. And like, I couldn't like leave the hospital for like 3 or 4 days. And it kind of like reminded me of my own mortality. But then at the same time, when I left the hospital, because I'd been watching the thing on my phone the whole time, I left the hospital and I went back to my house and I rewatched the final episode on my proper big computer screen at home with like good speakers and, you know, again, like a big, nice display with like proper colors and everything. And I just like started like bawling like a baby because I thought it was so incredibly good. I'm so annoying when it comes to my taste in things like movies and stuff like that. I don't know if annoying is the right word or not, but I know I watch things with an extremely critical eye. And one of the things that has kind of taken over the industry recently in both Netflix, but also kind of more traditional Hollywood, is that everything is a cash grab. Mm-hmm. All of the greatest series on Netflix, it gets to like the last episode and it's leading up to this great, everything leads up to this moment of cathartic release where everything, like all the tension is going in this one direction, but then they do I can't remember the term, the bait and switch.
Cliffhanger.
Yeah, it's the thing that you were expecting to resolve the whole thing becomes So tune in for season 2.
Yeah.
And they take it in a different direction. And every time I see that, like, it makes me want to like throw my computer at the ground. It bugs me to no end. And so many Hollywood movies at the same time are also like remakes. Many of them are fantastic, but I feel like I hadn't seen something that really, really, truly resonated with me for so long, and something that had the courage to write a wonderful story and not try and cash in on it after the fact.
Cyberpunk
Edgerunners. So I won't get into any spoilers, but they do more or less the exact opposite of what every other show does on Netflix, where it's like, oh, okay, they're definitely going to make like a season 2. And like, this makes me like super excited to watch season 2. But at the same time, oh, like I'm kind of like let down that they didn't properly do like a cathartic release or whatever. It's like, no, they lean into the fact that it's over. It's over. Funnily enough, they're actually making a season 2, but it's with like an entirely different cast of characters, from what I understand.
It's a different story, basically. That story from season 1 is finished.
Exactly. And the creators of that were extremely passionate about the fact that this needs to be a finished story that doesn't, do what I just talked about a second ago. And I was so moved by it, and so just like, thank you. Yes. Thank you. They did it. And like, somebody finally. And when I saw that, I was like, right, this is what I'm actually passionate about. This is what I've been wanting to do. And I just didn't realize it because for the past 4 years, I've been so busy with like my kids. Now, at the same time, it was actually around that time, I want to say that was like the first year my kids started going to, it was one of their first years at preschool. Mm-hmm. So it was like it was the early stages of me not being at home with them all the time and always watching them. And so it was also, I was finally in a situation where if I wanted to, I probably could do some creative writing and not kind of like the joke stuff like that I'm doing on YouTube, but like the long form, like storytelling that I've always been, that's always been my primary passion. And so ever since I finished watching Edgerunners, and I actually had a crazy opportunity to befriend the creator of that series. That's another insane story, but without going on that tangent too much, he's an awesome guy, and I've learned a tremendous amount from him, Rafal Yaki. But ever since I finished watching that show, I've been waking up at more or less between 5 and 5:30 every day. And I spend the first hour and a half of every day doing creative writing that's separate from everything that I've been doing on YouTube. And so within the next year, I'll be announcing something that I've been working on in that sense. And then ideally within the subsequent year, I'll be able to work on another project that I've been doing in that same time. I've been working on 2 projects in parallel that are both creative writing projects that I haven't talked about really extensively anywhere. And I won't really until they come out, but I've been working on them for quite a long time at this point. So I'm really excited to get to this point where we're probably less than 6 months out from the first project going public.
You beat me to it. I was going to ask, what can we expect from you in the coming year? But it seems that actually, contrary to my question, where I was maybe insinuating that perhaps you were a little stuck in that niche of doing short bits comedy, you're now expanding even further into more complex creative writing, bigger projects, more long-term projects, and we will all get to discover all of this in the coming years.
That's right. So again, who knows if it'll be good or not? That's for the audience to decide in terms of my ability. That said, I've definitely had the privilege of working with people that are just like insanely talented. So I'm really excited to see the reception for, if nothing less, their work once it's live. And hopefully there are some people in the audience that end up liking the creative writing that I've done on those projects as well.
Dogen, thank you so much for coming all the way.
It's been a pleasure.
Sharing so much of your story from the US to Japan, your interest into Japanese language and pitch accent, your journey onto content creation and creative writing. And you certainly got us excited for all the new projects coming. So maybe...
Yeah, hopefully I didn't raise the expectations too much.
I think it will be a great opportunity to have you back once they're out there and to people to see, and maybe we can talk about it. Thank you again.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
Thank you everyone for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we'll be back again next week. Bye.
See you guys.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future conversations. And we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this episode, here are a couple more that we think you'll enjoy. Thanks again for your support, and we'll see you next time.